Hey, Boker. Daf Yomi is Gittin Daf Zion. Gittin Daf Ches. Today's Daf Yomi is Gittin 8. We're going to start on Zion Bays around 10 lines from the bottom, where the Gemara brings down two contradictory brisos about. We know this idea that if you bring the get from overseas, you have to say v'fanai nachtam. You have to say, if you bring it from Medina Sayyam, the agent has to say the get was written and signed before me. So what about if you bring it on a ship? Tani Chada, maybe get Bisfina, and the assumption is you're bringing this on a ship, and the ship is perhaps in the waters of the land of Israel. So if you bring the get on a ship, can maybe bear it Israel. It's like you're bringing it in the land of Israel. So since the ship is going to be considered like you're in the space of the land, and therefore you don't have to recite b'fanei nachtam. Whereas the other source says, the other price, it says, maybe b'chul. It says if you bring the get on a ship, it's like you're bringing it outside the land of Israel. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah says, not difficult. How? Because we have these contradictory sources about what happened if you bring the get on the ship. So they reflect two different opinions. Tanan, we learned afar chutzlarts. Let's say you have the earth from the land, from outside the land. Habab is svino eretz, that's coming on a ship. It's in the airspace. So the assumption of the Gemara at this point is that you're in the rivers of the land of Israel, and you have earth that comes from outside of Israel. But now you're in the rivers of the land of Israel. You're going to be liable for Meiser and Shvius. You're liable for the tithing and the sabbatical year. And so that's the position of the rabbis. That's the position that you would not say b'fanei nachtav, presumably. And Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda says, when do we say that you don't say b'fanei nachtav, because you're in the land of Israel? That's only when the ship is like hugging the ground. But if the ship is not on the ground, you're exempt. So therefore, presumably, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the ship is just on the rivers, then you're not going to recite. Then you are going to recite b'fanei nachtav and b'fanei nachtam. It's only when the ship is on the ground that you're not going to recite it. So Abaye says, no, we could say that both brisos, the one that says you say b'fanei nachtam and the one that says you don't, they could both reflect the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Hava Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha kamazman she'ina svina gosheshes, kamazman she'asvina gosheshes. When the ship is on the ground, then you're going to say it's in the land of Israel, and you don't say b'fanei nachtam. When it's not on the ground, it's just floating on the water, then it's like outside the land of Israel, you say b'fanei nachtav. Amar Rabbi Zera. So Rabbi Zera says this debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan connects to another debate about a flower pot, which is a plant which is in a pot, and the pot has a hole in it, and the pot is on tripod, so the pot is not on the ground; it's on a stake, and so, but it's sucking up the nutrients from the sunlight or the airspace of the land of Israel. So Amar Rabbi Zera, Atzitz Nakov. Let's say if this pot, which has a hole in it, it's on these stakes. So Rabbi Yehuda would say it has to be on the ground, and so therefore it has the law. If it's on stakes, it doesn't have the laws of the sabbatical year. It doesn't have the laws of the land of Israel. Whereas Rabbanan say no, it's still over the airspace, so it's going to be like the laws of Israel. So Amarava Del Maloim, it's not necessarily the same dispute. Ad Kam will come Rabbi Yehuda Hasam. When does Rabbi Yehuda say by a ship that it needs to be on the ground? He only says that by a svina, by a ship. Why? We're on top of Chesam and Aleph. Hasuya Avroch. The ship is meant to be moving. So therefore, we're not going to view it as in the land of Israel unless it's moving. But a flower pot, which is meant to be stationary, it doesn't need to be on the ground. It doesn't need to be on the ground in order to assume it's part of the land. Or Inami Adkan will come Rabbanan Hasim. Or else, when did the Rabbanan say their position that it's considered to be outside the land of Israel? They only say that by a svina, by a ship, because there's no air in between the ship and the water. And the Maya Kiara Smichta the Maya, because the water is like the land in that it's connected via the water. And so therefore the rabbis say when you're on the ship, it's like you're on the ground. But the plant that's in the pot, there's air in between. So the rabbis would say it's not part of the land of Israel. So you can't say that this is the same dispute. Rav Nachman So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar Benaros Eretz Yisrael. Let's say Rav Bar Yitzchak says this dispute where Rabbi Yehuda says it needs to be on the ground, and the Rabbanan say as long as it's on the ship, we're going to assume it's part of the land of Israel, even if the ship is not hugging the ground of the water. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says Benaros Eretz Yisrael. If let's say we're in the Yarkon River in Tel Aviv or something, then Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says everybody would agree that you're part of Israel. Where are they arguing? They're only arguing about the Yam HaGadol, which is a term for the Mediterranean Sea. Tanya Ezu Eretz Ezu Chutz, because we learned in the Brisa what's considered the land of Israel and what's considered Chutz La'aretz. What's the land of Israel? What's Chutz La'aretz? Kol Shofea v'Yored Mituri Amnon Ulefnim. So what's the border of the land of Israel? If on the northern border, if you go up to the mountains of Amnon and you go inward, that's the land of Israel. Mituri Amnon Ulchutz, but if you go outward, that's Chutz La'aretz. That's outside the land of Israel. What about Hanisin Shebayam? What about those islands in the sea? Because Turi Amnon is on the sea coast. And one of those islands, how are they going to be? Let's say they're inside of Turi Amnon, but they're in the ocean or the Mediterranean Sea. So how would we view that land? We draw a line, imaginary line, down from Turi Amnon all the way to what's called Nachal Mitzrayim, and we say anything that's inside that line is going to be considered like the laws of the land of Israel. But anything outside those lines is like Chutz La'aretz. But Rabbi Yehuda says Kol Shek. So we see from here, according to this position, anything that's in these waters is going to be considered from that line of Turi Amnon in is for sure going to be considered part of the land of Israel. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says Kol Sheken Neged Eretz Yisrael Hareu Eretz Yisrael. He says anything in the ocean that's opposite the land of Israel is going to be considered like the land of Israel. And Rashi explains Afilu ad Okeanos L'Marav, even from the ocean to the west, Shu B'Sofa Olam, until the edge of the world is going to be considered like the land of Israel. That's what Yehuda says. As it says, V'Gvul Yam, what's the border by the sea? V'Yolacham Yam HaGadol. The Gvul, that the Mediterranean Sea is the western border. V'Gvul Zeh Yelachem Gvul Yam, and this border will be for you a Gvul Yam. And Rashi explains that this extra Gvul is extra. So it's to tell us, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that the word Gvul is included within, that the sea is included within the boundary of Israel. So in the Middle Ages, Rabbeinu Tam, who died in the early 13th, Rabbeinu Tam, who lived in the 12th century, the Rabbeinu Peter comes to Rabbeinu Tam and asks him the following question. He says, nowadays, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we should have to, even though we were living in France, he lived in, Rabbeinu Tam lived in Ramrou. So it's in northern France in the Champagne region. So he said, we should have to do Truma Meiser because we're west of Israel. So he says, yeah, we don't pass like Rabbi Yehuda. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, in Achinami, we would have to do the Truma Meiser and observe Shemitah even outside the land of Israel. Well, he didn't say Shemitah, but he said we would have to do the tithing of the land. Possible that even in Israel, you don't have to do Shemitah. So he wasn't going to say that we have to do Shemitah in the Middle Ages, but he said we would have to do Truma Meiser. He said, yeah, but we don't rule like Rabbi Yehuda. We follow the Chacham and we say it's only from the Torah Amnon to Nachal Mitzrayim and the line inside of it. So then we continue, Vanis and Shevitztad. And what about those islands that are not directly opposite the land of Israel? So imagine that the Kapaluria is a city next to Tur Amnon. So imagine that there's a line going out from there westward until the Okinayos, until the ocean, and also Minacham Mitzrayim Akunayos, and also on the south of that from the Nachal Mitzrayim all the way out to the ocean. And whatever's inside those lines, So, and from the strings outside, that's going to be chutz la'aretz. So that's the rabbis have they have, according to Rabbi Yehuda, everything within that area is going to be considered like the land of Israel. The Rabbanan Hai Ugvul Mayavdile. What do the rabbis use this extra word gvul? It's to teach us that these islands are going to be considered part of the land of Israel. Rabbi Yehuda says the Nisan will tzricha. We don't need a specific verse to tell us that the islands are part of the land of Israel, because we're going to say it's obvious that some of the islands are included. It's just a question of the boundaries. And we see that the boundaries are all the way to the west, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So we say that everybody agrees that the rivers are included. They're only arguing about whether the Yam HaGadol, if you're bringing it in the sea, is going to be included. That according to according to the Rabbanan, it's only that portion of the Yam HaGadol. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, it goes all the way out to the end of the world. Until the end of the world, it's going to be included. So therefore, we have to say those two braisos that we have before. One brisa says that if you bring it on a ship, you say funny nachtam, and the other one says that you don't say it. That both of those braisas are talking about that the get is written in one of these places. That according to one brisa, he says that holds like the Tana, that according to that place, that place is considered land of Israel, and so therefore you don't need to say funny nachtam. If you're written beyond the like according to Rabbi Yehuda's position, all the way out there in the Mediterranean. Where according to the second brisa, he's going to say that that's like chutz la'aretz, and so therefore you need to say fanei nachtam. So now continuing along in the Gemara, Rabbi Meir Omer Akko ke'eretz Yisrael. Again, Rabbi Meir said that Akko, which is in the northern point of Israel, is going to be considered like Eretz Yisrael for Gittin. So So they asked the following question from Rabbi Chia. Kamochar Abdul Surya, that if somebody sells his slave to Syria, Kamochar b'chutz la'aretz dami ovel. So we have a couple of halachos we need to know that there were parts of the land of Israel we're told to conquer. Those parts are Israel. They're considered the land of Israel. But then there were parts that King David conquered on his own. And he wasn't commanded by God to conquer them. That's called kibush yachid, his individual conquest. And so parts of the area he conquered was what they called Syria, which includes areas north of the land of Israel. And part of that is today modern day Syria. So the question that they asked Rav Chia bar Ava, so then there's another halacha, that if you sell your slave, your Canaanite slave, outside the land of Israel, the slave is not going to be able to keep some of the mitzvos, so he automatically goes free. So let's say you sell your slave to Syria. So is it kimochar b'chutz la'aretz? I mean, it's like you sold your slave outside the land of Israel because it's not part of the biblical land of Israel, and so therefore the slave goes free. Or maybe we're saying since David conquered it, this slave wouldn't go free. So Rabbi Chia bar Abba responded to Nisua. We learned this brisa. Rabbi Meir says, we learned this in the Mishnah. Rabbi Meir says, Akko ke'eretz Yisrael Gittin. That the Akko, which is north of the land, which presumably is still part of the biblical Israel, it's not yet to Syria, is like the land of Israel for Gittin, which means to say that if you sell your slave there, Gittin in that the slave would go free. It's not part of the land of Israel with respect to slaves. So the Gemara said, and so therefore we would see that for Syria also, that it's not part of the land of Israel with respect to slaves, and the slave would go free. The Kolsha came Syria, the Merchaka Tuva, and for sure Syria, the slave would go free because the slave is even farther from the land of Israel. So if you sell your slave to Syria, the slave goes free. Tana Rabbanan Bishlosha Durachem. So since we're talking about Syria, in three ways, Syria Shabta Syria Eretz Yisrael Bishlosha Chutz La'aretz. In three ways, Syria is like the land of Israel, and in three ways, it's like Chutz La'aretz. What are the three ways? The three ways it's like Eretz Yisrael is Afra, Siman Av Barek. Okay, this is the way to remember it. Av Barek. Afra, so the ayin stands for Afra Tamei Kechutz La'aretz. Now we have a halacha that the earth outside the land of Israel is going to become tamei because they weren't careful about. Rabbis made it takana because they weren't careful about dead bodies there. The Gemara discusses elsewhere what's the exact reason for the takana, but one of the reasons is because they weren't Rashi says shegazro. They made a decree that outside the land of Israel is going to become the earth is tamei, and so therefore, even though we say Syria was conquered by David, nevertheless it's going to be liable. We're going to say Afretamika Chutzars, and so therefore, if you sell your slave to Syria, it's Afretamika Chutzars. The first thing is that your earth is tamei like Chutzars. So therefore, if you go into Chutzars and you touch the earth in Syria, we're going to say that you become tamei rabbinically. And secondly, or the truma, and then if you touch truma, the truma is tamei rabbinically. Number two. A mocher abdo is Syria. Somebody sells their slave to Syria. It's like you sold it outside the land of Israel, and they go three. And number three, I maybe get me Syria can maybe mechutz la'aretz. If you bring your get from Syria to Eretz Yisrael, then you're going to have to say fanei nachta. And Rashi explains because we don't have caravans that are going back and forth, and so therefore we view it as chutz la'aretz. Ubishlosho Eretz Yisrael. In three cases, Syria is viewed as Eretz Yisrael. What are three cases? Chayeves b'maiser ubishviyas Eretz Yisrael. That the biblical laws apply to Syria, that in the sense that you have to take a tithe and observe the sabbatical year like the land of Israel. Number two, I wrote say that if you want to go into the land of Syria and you don't automatically become tamei. If somebody you can go in and not touch the earth, the Gemara is going to discuss. You going in a box, then you're still ritually pure. But if you had been outside the land of Israel in a place other than Syria, you would automatically become tamei. And number three is Akona Sada Basuria Kikona, that if you buy a field in Syria, it's like you're buying it with Parvari Yerushalayim. And Parvari, Rashi explains, is like the suburbs of Jerusalem. And the Gemara is going to say what that's relevant for. So let's just first go back in order. Says the Gemara, Chayeves b'maiser, we're on top of Chesam base. Chayeves b'maiser b'shviyas Eretz Yisrael, that you're going to be liable in the land of Syria to do tithes and sabbatical year like Israel. Kasavar kibush yachad shmei kibush. This Tana's other position, or this statement, this price is of the position that when David conquered as an individual, it's considered conquering. And so therefore you have to bring the tithes. And if you want to enter in a state of ritual purity, you can enter into it. But Bahamras, then we just say Afra Tamei, then we just say it's earth is Tamei. The Gemara says, yeah, but Sheda Teva Migdal, you can enter into it in a box if you don't touch the earth, and so therefore it's Tamei. You see from here the genius of the Gemara to anticipate future events. Who would enter into the land of Israel outside the land of Israel in a box? Who would ever have thought of such a thing? Of course, it's so relevant when we talk about ritual impurity today. If a Kohen goes over a cemetery in a train or in an airplane, it's like he's going over in a box. So whether or not that's going to be considered like he becomes tamei. So here we see that if you enter into the land of Israel, outside the land of Israel, into Syria in a box, you're going to be tahor. The Tanya we learned in the Brayso, if you enter into the land outside of Israel in a box, Rabbi Mitame, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Mitame. Rabbi says you're tamei, that you can't even enter into it in a box. And Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says you're tahor. And even though Rabbi says you're tamei, I feel Rabbi lokom tamei al ba'aretz ha'amim. He only says you're tamei in all the rest of the lands, like United States or Europe, the Gazer al Gush al Avir, because there's a decree both about the Gush, the earth, and the airspace. Of Syria, al Gush al Gazer al Avir al Gazer. But in Syria, they made a decree only on the earth, but not on the airspace. And so therefore, if you enter into the land of Syria in a box, you're not going to become tamei. So then the Gemara says, the Akona Sada Besuria, and somebody acquires a field in Syria, Kikona Parvari Yerushalayim. If you acquire a field in Syria, it's like you acquired it in the suburbs of Jerusalem. To what degree is this relevant? What does it mean if you acquired a field in Syria? It's like you acquired in the suburbs. It's to tell us that if you acquiring it from an idolater and you want him to write a shtar, a contract that you sold it, then they can write this document for you about Shabbos, and you can write this document even on Shabbos because it's a mitzvah to acquire land outside the land of Israel. And so the Gemara says, even on Shabbos, Gemara says, like Rava taught, like Rava taught in another context, and Masechah Shabbos, Rava said in another context that you can ask an idolater to do work on your behalf, on behalf of a sick person. And so too, here too, you could say, ask the idolater to do it. And even though asking an idolater to do something for you is a rabbinic prohibition, in this case, because it's a mitzvah to settle the land, Rashi says to drive out the idolaters from the land and to settle the land. Therefore, they're allowing you, they didn't make the decree against the Shavuos in this case. The commentary is learned from here that in general, you can't just ask an idolater to do a mitzvah on your behalf if it's a rabbinic prohibition on Shabbos. But so a Shavuos is not permitted to ask an idolater to do. Not allowed to ask an idolater to do a mitzvah for you. That's considered a rabbinic prohibition, asking the idolater. But a shvus to shvus, if it was already a rabbinic prohibition and you want to ask the idolater to do something, then generally we'll say shvus to shvus in the place of a mitzvah will be permitted on Shabbos. So now the Gemara continues that we know that not only if an agent brings the get, does the agent have to say but even if a woman is acting as the agent, and she brings the get, she also has to say, if the husband says, you're going to be divorced when you bring this get in front of the court. So we also learned, and we're going to learn this in the next Mishnah, that a slave who brings the get also has to, if he brings his document of emancipation, which is also called the get shichrur, he also has to say this phrase of b'fanei nachtam. So now the Gemara says, we learned in the Brisa, let's say the slave is bringing his document of emancipation, and it's written on this document, you're acquiring yourself, you're acquiring your freedom, and also you're acquiring all my possessions, and they're all acquired by you. He's acquired himself, but he has not acquired the possessions. Why does he acquire himself? Because any document needs to be certified. So you need to certify the document. So you need two witnesses to certify it. So he doesn't get the possessions until you have two witnesses certifying it. On himself, that we established already that as long as he says b'fanei nachtam, Rava said that that's the equivalent of certification. We said at the very beginning of our Masechta. So therefore, he can certify the document himself by saying it was written in front of him. But he's only certifying the emancipation, but not the acquisition of the property. So the Gemara says, well, let's say we combine it into one phrase called nechasaya kinuyilach. All of my possessions you're acquiring, meaning say you're acquiring both your own emancipation and all my possessions, but he formulates it in one sentence. So it says, Abai says, well, since the phrase formulation works for him to acquire himself, he's also going to acquire all of his possessions. Rava disagrees. He says, I understand why he can acquire himself because it's just like a woman who, when she brings her divorce, she says, and she's certifying the get. But he shouldn't be able to acquire the assets that the master has promised. Why? Because how is in general certification you require two witnesses. So therefore, Rava says, So therefore, Rava says, I understand why he acquires himself, but the possessions he doesn't acquire. And so that's what Rava says. In that case, he only acquires himself, but not the possessions. Whereas Abai said he acquired everything. Abai then said, actually, Abai says he acquires nothing. He acquires nothing. If he can't acquire himself, therefore he can't acquire the nechasim under those circumstances. Either the whole statement works or nothing works. Whereas Rava says, Rava says, I understand why he doesn't acquire the nechasim, the property, because you need two witnesses to certify that aspect of it. But he should be able to acquire himself because it's similar to the case of when a woman brings a get. She can certify the document even herself. So therefore, So therefore, we see here is the concept of palgina and dibur, that we split his words. Abai says we could split his words and apply them where they're relevant, and don't apply them where they don't apply, and therefore he acquires himself, but not the possession. Whereas Abai says we can't say palgina and dibur. So either he's able to fully acquire himself with all the possessions, or he's not able to acquire even himself. That's the conclusion of Abai. Whereas Rava says, no, Pagin and Debur, we are able to split his words, and so therefore he's able to emancipate himself through this document, but he's not able to get the possessions of the master. So therefore, Rava says in both cases where he splits the phrase or whether he puts it all into one phrase, he acquires himself and not the nechasim. So we'll stop the recording here. And we could go on a couple more minutes. So.